How does one become healthy? Health is wealth. And like wealth, doing the things with the best return on investment is what's going to make the biggest difference. The World Health Organization defines health as not simply the absence of disease, but a state of complete social, mental, and physical well-being. To that end, today we are covering blood markers, vital targets, aerobic targets, metabolic targets, social targets, and mental targets. So let's dive in. The big three that will have the biggest return on investment: sleep, diet, and exercise. Sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation, i.e., less than 6 hours, or fragmented, or with repeated wake ups, is associated with an increased risk for stroke, heart attacks, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, as well as things such as low testosterone and growth hormone, higher cortisol and systemic inflammation, and a more prevalent age-related cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's. The general recommendation is 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep, aiming for most nights of the week. Naturally, sleep is not guaranteed for everyone, especially if you work night shifts, but trying to get the best sleep possible most times is what is most important. So what is good quality sleep? Sleep has two main phases. You get your deep sleep, that accounts for about 15 to 25% of sleep duration. It's important for growth hormone release, tissue repair, memory consolidation, and immune regulation. And then light sleep or REM sleep, which is 20 to 25% of total sleep duration. It's important for neuroplasticity and learning, emotional regulation, and CNS recovery. So how do you actually get good quality sleep? Circadian consistency is important. Trying to go to bed and waking up at the same time most days, usually within 30 minutes, is important. So if on Monday I go to bed at 9, then between 8:30 and 9:30 I should go to bed on Tuesday. Same thing again for Wednesday, Thursday, etc. Choose a bedtime that seems to work for you, and then stay within half an hour of that on each side. Naturally, trying to catch up on sleep is good. It's good for rest. So on days where you do feel quite sleep deprived, do not be afraid to sleep in a bit longer, but do not consistently do that. Try to, like we said, aim for your within 30 minutes time frame most days of the week. Getting morning sunlight, ideally within 15 to 30 minutes of waking, is good. It anchors your suprachiasmatic nucleus and improves melatonin timing and release in the evening, which improves your sleep quality. And then reducing your temperature at night, ideally staying between 19 and 17 degrees Celsius, or 62 and 66 degrees Fahrenheit. A low body temperature initiates sleep faster, so before bed you can use light bedding, cool showers, air conditioning, or fans. Try to stop your caffeine early. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 8 hours. Have your latest caffeine at midday, 12 p.m., or even at 10 a.m. if you're sensitive to caffeine or having a very large amount. Control light exposure to avoid bright LEDs. Reduce your phone brightness. On a lot of smartphones nowadays, you can set a nighttime schedule where it automatically reduces your brightness and uses a warmer tone from a certain time. Dim lights 2 hours before bed. Blue light suppresses melatonin production. Then exercise. Resistance training and zone 2 cardio helps improve sleep efficiency and increases deep sleep duration. And intense training within 2 hours of bedtime can delay sleep onset. Reduce your alcohol intake. Alcohol reduces the amount of REM sleep you get. It increases your sympathetic activation and causes sleep fragmentation. Even though a light buzz can make you feel like you're relaxed, it makes sleep quality worse. So the trade-off is not worth it. Avoid eating too late as well. Have your last meal ideally 2 to 3 hours before bed. Heavy meals too close to bed can worsen heart rate variability, impair your deep sleep, increase the risk of acid reflux, and sleep disruption. After sleep, we get to diet. The goal of your diet should be to improve metabolic health, preserve lean mass, reduce chronic inflammation, support cardiovascular health, and most importantly, it should be sustainable. It doesn't help for you to start a new diet, such as being vegan, if you are not vegan already, and then falling off the wagon in 2 or 3 weeks and going back to your old habits. Consistency is key, and sustainability leads to consistency. So, the core principles of our diet is to help maintain a healthy body composition, have an adequate protein intake, high fiber intake, eat minimally processed foods, stabilize blood glucose levels, limit your saturated fats, have enough micronutrients, avoid chronic caloric excess, and improve metabolic flexibility. So that brings us to energy balance. Chronic overnutrition is one of the biggest drivers of chronic disease, such as insulin resistance, diabetes, oxidative stress, increased levels of visceral fat, high inflammatory markers, and cardiovascular disease. So your average daily caloric intakes for men and women are, for men, 2,000 to 3,200 calories daily, women 1,600 to 2,500 calories daily. Important to note that these are averages. Obviously, the exact caloric requirement for maintaining your weight depends on your age, your amount of lean mass, and your physical activity. It needs to be individualized. In short, if you gain weight week to week, eating too much. If you're losing weight week to week, you're eating too little, assuming that is not your goal. So, protein. Lean mass is a strong predictor of healthy aging. The focus is on preventing frailty and maintaining independence with age. You don't want to be that old person needing a walker, needing a wheelchair, who can barely go up the stairs themselves. So how much protein do you need? 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram per day. So on average, a 70 kilogram person, it's about 150 pounds, needs 84 grams to 126 grams of protein daily. Split the protein as evenly as possible between meals, but the total daily amount should still be the first priority. The initial protein recommendation of the FDA and other various nutritional bodies is to prevent deficiency. But higher intakes of protein are associated with more lean mass retention with age, a better body composition, and better performance physically and cognitively. So higher protein is good in most people. A good rule of thumb is to aim for a minimum of 100 grams of protein a day. Next up, we get to fiber. So, what is fiber? Fiber intake consistently correlates with a lower mortality rate. Ideally, you should aim for 35 to 50 grams of fiber per day from varying sources. Fiber lowers LDL, improves your microbiome diversity, provides better glycemic and weight control, and lowers your risk of colon cancer. It improves satiety as well. Glycemic control is important because chronic hypoglycemia accelerates vascular aging. So, reduce the amount of sugary drinks, reduce refined carbs, and reduce constant snacking. Then you get to fats. Fat quality matters more than fat quantity, assuming you aren't having an excess amount of calories. Aim for monounsaturated fats and omega-3s. Limit trans fats and saturated fats. Fish and plant fats are much preferred over your typical animal fats. So as far as possible, avoid the fatty cuts of steak. Aim for more lean meats like chicken, turkey, maybe a sirloin without eating the fat cap, things like that. Omega-3s help lower inflammation, improve endothelial function, lower triglycerides. So aiming for 1 to 3 grams of EPA/DHA 2 to 4 times weekly would be the gold standard. Try to avoid highly or ultra-processed foods as far as possible because these have a strong association with higher mortality rates. Not the food itself though. The health effects are a combination of factors that highly processed foods have in common. Hyperpalatability, i.e., hard to stop eating, which means it's easy to overconsume and have quite a high caloric intake. It has poor micronutrient variation, typically are low in fiber and protein, usually high in refined carbs and saturated fats. They have a low satiety score, and they are low in beneficial compounds like polyphenols and antioxidants. Now, ultra-processed foods are cheap. Some people struggle with food insecurity. They are basically essential, but it is all about making slightly smarter choices, not necessarily changing everything and completely overhauling your diet. Exercise, the other high ROI. Regular exercise is associated with better quality of life and longer lives. Exercise helps manage stress and anxiety, improves metabolic and cardiovascular health, maintains insulin sensitivity, maintains lean mass, strength, and functionality with age. It's good for balance and fall prevention, especially as one gets older, and it helps improve immunity and reduce inflammatory markers. If you are not already exercising, walking is probably the easiest intervention for sedentary lifestyles. It can lower your cardiovascular risk, lower stress levels, maintain a healthy weight, have better glucose control, especially if you take a little short walk after meals. And it's an easy introduction to movement in unfit individuals or people struggling with disability. The goal is for 8,000 to 12,000 steps daily as a baseline to increase daily caloric expenditure by 300 to 600 calories just by walking. Naturally, this changes depending on your body habitus and your job. But like we said, it's more for people in sedentary lifestyles, people doing manual labor, construction and such. They will get 8 to 10,000 steps daily just existing. Aerobic fitness. Cardiovascular fitness or aerobic fitness is one of the biggest predictors of longevity. It's measured in something called VO2 max. A higher VO2 max correlates with lower cardiovascular mortality, better insulin sensitivity, improved mitochondrial function, reduced dementia risk, and a lower blood pressure. You should aim for 150 to 300 minutes per week of zone 2 or more cardio. Zone 2 cardio is 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, meaning you are able to breathe through your nose and able to talk in short sentences. Resistance training is another important part of exercise. Muscle mass usually declines progressively after the age of 30 as hormone levels start to decrease. Lower muscle mass or lean mass strongly predicts your risk of frailty, insulin resistance, high rates of falls, and high rates of dependence and worse bone density. 3 to 4 sessions per week of resistance training should be the ideal. Focus on progressive overload, which challenges you and improves adaptation. Compound movements to train large muscle groups all at once and translates well to ADLs. ADLs are activities of daily living. So squats, deadlifts, presses, pulls, and loaded carries. Squats, deadlifts, needing to bend down to pick things up. Presses and pulls, picking things up as well. Loaded carries, carrying the groceries. And doing them with a full range of motion to help maintain flexibility and functionality. Mobility work. Joint stiffness with age also reduces quality of life. The goal is for 10 to 15 minutes of dynamic stretching daily, in addition to a full range of motion with resistance training. Best to focus on ankles, shoulders, hips, and your thoracic and lumbar spine, because these are the ones that typically get the most stiff as one gets older. Go until you get mild discomfort or pain, hold for 30 seconds to 1 minute, and then repeat 3 to 4 times per muscle group. Supplements. Supplements can be helpful in the pursuit of longevity. Like we said earlier, sleep, diet, and exercise are your biggest returns on investments, and supplements and medications are just the icing on the top. Supplements for sleep. In addition to the other lifestyle changes that we said during the sleep section, such as dimming the lights, not being overstimulated, limiting high food intake before bed, things like that, certain supplements can also help. Magnesium glycinate, that provides 200 to 400 milligrams of elemental magnesium 1 to 2 hours for bed. It's good for relaxation and decreasing sleep latency. Sleep latency is how long it takes you to fall asleep. Glycine, 3 to 4 or 5 grams before bed, helps improve subjective sleep quality and lowers core temperature. Melatonin, 0.3 to 1 milligram is your physiological dose, taken 1 to 2 hours before bed, helps decrease sleep latency as well. Avoid it in chronic high doses unless it is prescribed by a medical professional. So anything higher than 2 milligrams, ideally stay away from unless it is needed for short acute bursts. L-theanine, 100 to 200 milligrams 1 to 2 hours before bed, is helpful, especially if your insomnia is anxiety or stress driven. Diet supplements. Berberine, 1 gram to 2 grams per day, split into 2 to 4 doses. It is a plant compound that shows some mild effects on glucose control and lipid absorption, and is usually taken around meals. For practicality, most people do not take anything 3 times a day. Most people go for twice or once a day. So for practicality purposes, take it in the morning with breakfast and in the evening after supper. Soy musk of 5 to 10 grams daily, ideally prior to meals, helps slow gastric emptying, raise satiety, and because it's a fiber, it lowers your LDL. Then supplements for exercise. Creatine of 5 to 10 grams daily increases phosphocreatine levels, allowing for improved power output and better lean mass retention. Higher levels of creatine show improvement in cognition, especially in those with highly stressed states or in older people. The beta-alanine, 3 to 5 grams daily, assists with lactic acid buffering during exercise, allowing for longer, harder bouts of exercise, especially for your aerobic fitness. Then L-citrulline, 6 to 8 grams daily as a pre-workout or split into AM and PM dosing, improves vascular pliability, lowers blood pressure, and improves fatigue tolerance. Measurements and markers. Saying all the things about diet, exercise, and sleep is all well and good, but how do you actively measure whether your interventions are working? One of the important things to look at is body fat and BMI. BMI may not necessarily be the best tool for measurement, but it gives a general idea. The idea is to maintain a healthy body weight without being too fat or too lean or too muscular. BMI just takes your height and weight in a ratio without accounting for fat or lean mass. And there's a little thingy at the bottom. For most people, a better measurement instead of BMI would be body fat percentage. For men, 12 to 18% body fat tends to be a healthier long-term range. For women, 20 to 28% tends to be a healthier long-term range. Naturally, it depends. In some individuals, a lower body fat makes them feel better. In some people, a higher body fat makes them feel better. But the goal is to be fit not overly fat, not overly lean. So if you look on the female diagram, the between fitness and average is where you should aim to be. And if you look on the male diagram, the second and third is where, well, the first three are where most people should aim to be, with 15% kind of being the sweet spot. So how do you measure body fat? You can do skin fold caliper testing, best done by a trained professional, but it can be inaccurate due to user error. Body impedance scans can be inaccurate for a specific reading, but they are good for measuring trends. So your N-body scan or your body impedance scan, if you are just going once in a while to check, not very helpful. However, they are good for serial measurements, such as doing it once a month, just to see kind of how things are going. The DEXA is the second best choice, but it can be off as much as 20% either way. So if you are 10% body fat, a DEXA could say you are at 30%. It could say you are at 1%. Naturally not very accurate. The DEXA is more accurate the leaner you are, but for a lot of obese people, it tends to underestimate the amount of fat they have. MRI is the gold standard of body fat measurement tools, but it is incredibly expensive. Waist circumference is a better predictor of visceral fat than BMI. Visceral fat is the fat around your organs. It's the one that is going to kill you before your subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat is the one that most people want to get rid of because it's the one that makes you look obese. Aim for a waist circumference of less than 94 centimeters for a man and less than 80 centimeters for a woman. Naturally, this will depend on your height as well and your general frame, as taller people are going to be larger in general and have a larger waist. So what's good to take into account is the height with your waist to height ratio. You take your circumference divided by your height, and that gives you a ratio. So if you're a man with an 80 centimeter circumference waist and you're 175 centimeters tall, that gives you a waist to height ratio of 0.46, which, if you look in a little table, is the ideal longevity zone. So great stuff. Blood markers to look at, ideally at least twice a year, maybe 3 to 4 times, depending on how intense you are about it. 3 monthly is probably the best choice, but again, for some people, that's not practical. So middle of the year, end of the year, or middle of the year, start of the year, typically good. Blood markers to look for are ApoB or ApoB of less than 80 milligrams per deciliter. A high ApoB is associated with increased levels of atherosclerosis. Lipoprotein A of less than 30 is what you should aim for. High levels independently raise myocardial infarction risk and stroke risk. HbA1c, the optimal range of 4.5 to 5.5. It measures your average blood glucose over a 3-month period. CRP of less than 1. In some countries, it's called an HS-CRP. It measures low-grade inflammation systemically, and persistent elevation may be indicative of poor sleep, obesity, and a higher cardiovascular risk. A lipid panel. Dyslipidemia is one of the most important factors of cardiovascular disease. So aiming for triglycerides of less than 80 milligrams per deciliter is ideal. And with HDL, the higher the better. Homocysteine, aiming for 6 to 8 micromoles per liter. It's good. Low and high levels are associated with vascular disease. Higher levels may suggest folate deficiency or even a B12 deficiency. Creatinine and EGFR. EGFR is estimated glomerular filtration rate. It tracks your long-term kidney health. But important to note that higher muscle mass can raise creatinine levels, as well as creatine supplementation can also raise creatinine levels. That being said, just because they raise the creatinine level does not mean that is a bad thing. Chronically raised creatinine is the bad part. Creatine may raise your creatinine level mildly, and once you stop creatine, it comes back down to normal. That is okay. Creatinine that is raised for no apparent reason, that is the bad thing, because it can signal kidney damage. Cystatin C should be kept in the low to normal range. It's a better predictor of kidney function than creatinine and GFR because it is less affected by your muscle mass and creatine supplementation. So cystatin C is especially useful in athletic and muscular folks, but not all labs necessarily have access to doing a cystatin C level. Liver functions raised can indicate liver damage or dysfunction. Keep your ALT less than 20 and AST less than 25, and GGT should be kept in the low to normal range. A high GGT level is most commonly associated with alcoholic liver damage. If you are male, testosterone, free and total, important, should be kept in the physiological range, ideally mid-range to high, but not be super physiological, and should not be symptomatic either. Vitamin D, testosterone again is also about trends. If you typically are in the 500 nanograms per deciliter, like 500 to 600 nanogram per deciliter range, that's normal for you, great. If that drops to 300, that is something to look out for because it is not normal for what you are. But someone who's in 300 nanograms per deciliter their entire life, that's okay. Vitamin D, aiming for 75 to 125 nanomoles per liter, is good. It's essential for bone and mood health. Then iron studies, which is to find your deficiencies earlier rather than later, aiming for an HB of 12 to 16, ferritin in the normal range, and then B12. Uric acid should be kept in the low normal range. High levels are associated with hypertension and metabolic syndrome. And then for vitals, the easiest one that people can do at home, checking for blood pressure, heart rate, and SATs. Blood pressure, aim for less than 120/80, with up to 130/90 being acceptable in individuals more than 60 years old. Important for blood pressure measuring is you should measure it at more or less the same time every day, before coffee, ideally right as you wake up, using the same machine and the same arm. Different machines might read it differently. One day, if you measure it in the afternoon, you might have had more caffeine beforehand. That can raise your blood pressure. For your heart rate, you should aim for a resting heart rate of less than 70, ideally less than 60, but being careful not to be too low, i.e. less than 50, I would say, because bradycardias are also not great for health. And your SATs, that's your oxygen saturation, should remain at 96 to 100% at all times. Other health aspects that are important are your social and mental health aspects. Social aspects of religion are important because a sense of belonging and purpose is important as age progresses. Older people typically become progressively more isolated due to factors like less independence. Friends and family die or become more isolated themselves. They are no longer working, no longer have something to get up to look forward to in the morning. Poorer physical aging also leads to less engagement in hobbies as well. Again, bringing us back to diet and exercise being important. Religion in a lot of people can bring a sense of community as well as give you opportunities and activities for socialization, like going to church on Sundays, meeting for coffee, going to religious gatherings and functions. One doesn't have to necessarily be religious, but it's more about the sense of community and belonging that it gives. Mental health. Many studies show that a positive outlook, obviously within reason, has beneficial effects on the aging process, especially cognitively. I say within reason because such a thing as toxic positivity exists. So regular check-ins, especially with journaling or therapy with the psychologist, can help lower stress levels. A daily outdoor activity, especially in the sunlight, shows a large benefit in mental health. Regular activities that engage your focus can also help slow the aging process and allow better neuroplasticity. So that's like puzzles, puzzle games, quizzes, chess, reading, things like that. And things that can be done especially with someone else, such as board games. Great. Lovely stuff. So there you have it. That is essentially everything you need in order to become the healthiest version of yourself.